Washington, D.C. is a city of monuments. When it set out to build a subway, it seemed only right that that should be monumental too. By 1976, only a modern mass transit system could save the capital of the United States from traffic paralysis. But the cost of burrowing beneath the shrines of national bureaucracy was also going to be monumental. After it had been talked about for most of the century, there seemed to be only one thing on which everyone agreed. The Washington Metro was going to be the best system that the taxpayers' money could buy. When Metro did start operating, its spokesman was Cody Fansteel. Everyone called him Mr. Metro.
Every transit system should reflect the basic nature, the basic soul, the psyche of the city and the community that it is in. It isn't full of mirrors and glitzy and tinsel. It is stone and reflective of the kind of architecture that downtown Washington is. The system should serve the nature, the wants, the soul, the kind of city that it serves, in the kind of directions that people wish to travel.
No public transport operation in the world is more highly automated. Machines issue tickets in various denominations. Exit turnstiles deduct the correct fare and print out the amount that remains for future trips. But so high are Metro's running costs that for every dollar it takes in, $2 have to be laid out. It has been calculated that for the same outlay, every one of the daily riders could be taken to work until the year 2000 by taxi. Most of those who work and shop in Washington live in the sprawling suburbs that spill over into the state of Virginia on one side of the Potomac River and the state of Maryland on the other. Every county in those neighboring states through which the metro lines run had to be included in the planning. 9 jurisdictions in all. Washington itself stands in federal territory, the District of Columbia. It's a mere 67 square miles in area, only 3 times the size of Manhattan Island. But its catchment area, Metroland, has a population of 3.8 million. Metro's 5 lines eventually took 10 years to build and cost $6.7 billion. All but a tiny proportion of the cost was met by the federal government. The remaining 33 miles planned, of a total of 103, could bring the cost to $12 billion.
The shape of this system is such to serve the biggest single concentration of jobs, which is right in the middle of the region, downtown Washington. Therefore, the system doesn't go all around in concentric circles. In order to serve the greatest number of people getting to their jobs, you build a radial system that comes out from the middle, pumps into the middle, and then back out to the suburbs. We figured we'd had to do that first because that's where the seat of the government is, a very important, the biggest employer, and the retail establishments. So first, serve where the people are.
Getting Metro on the right track through all the hazards that confronted it made a lot of work for political lobbyists, a special Washington breed. Teresa Colling is one of them.
Lobbyist is a word that is derived from a Latin word lobium, which means covered walkway. I think that they applied that name to it because lobbyists traditionally talk to members in the corridors. They don't quite like to be characterized as a hired gun, but that's what we are often. For me in particular, I represent clients. The clients usually come to you, although lobbying has become so competitive that a lot of us look for business and go out and speak with clients and develop business that way. If we think that we're working on another issue for a client and we see something that comes up on Capitol Hill that they may be interested in, we can approach them and just say, are you aware that this is going on and this may impact your company? I think Washington is a good place for professional women to be. I like the power. I have a political science background, so I've always been interested in politics and how the whole system works, and I think it's a fine system. There's been a lot of criticism of the system in recent years and of interest groups and the impact that lobbyists have. Some people think lobbyists have too much power. But in general, I think that it's a good system and a lot of very dedicated people who work in this system. And it's an exciting place to be, and it is the seat of power. It's very exciting to be even a small part of it.
Howard! Hey!
Washington is a very fickle city. When the subway came, there was a lot of question over how much use it would actually get. It used to be that businessmen and professionals like myself thought that they were too good for the subway. We couldn't ride in a limousine or a cab. We certainly were not going to take the subway. I think that's changed because you simply cannot get around Washington without using the subway. There was a lot of politics involved in getting Metro started. You have to go underground, under all of these wonderful monuments. I'm sure that had to be a problem. And you did have all of the different political jurisdictions. Everyone was vying. They wanted the Metro in their backyard. It's usually not in my backyard, except when you're dealing with the subway system. Everybody wants a transportation. We have very extreme transportation problems in all of the jurisdictions that serve Washington, D.C.
When it came to Metro, no one seemed to be thinking along the same lines.
When you start with a blank sheet of paper and you have finally gotten the two states, Maryland to the north, Virginia to the south, and the state of mind called the District of Columbia in the middle, all to agree that this is something that they all need, but none can get separately, then you have to get an agreement on where the lines go and what is the first line to be built. Everything takes longer, everything takes more money. In this case, the delays were numerous. There's one stretch out by National Airport where we had to get about 20 different jurisdictions to sign off to let us dig the trench. 1,000 little details had to be settled, new rules had to be drawn, and that took a great deal of time. You had the usual thing of bureaucracies of, I didn't think of it, therefore we don't want to do it. You had the usual little fiefdoms of people who didn't want to give up their power.
Even before Washington became the nation's murder capital, as well as its political heart, Metro users worried about the danger from their fellow passengers. Chief Angus McLean and his patrolmen have more to do than keep graffiti at bay.
That committee reports to the police chief. Underneath us, we have subcommittees, narcotics subcommittee, training subcommittee, communications subcommittee, crime prevention subcommittee, right now an auto theft subcommittee. And as we need these committees, and they report to us, so we get to know very quickly what's going on in all jurisdictions. There are 9 jurisdictions. And while you think it might be very complicated, I must say it is. The laws are different in Virginia, for example. If a rock is thrown at a train, it is a felony, period. Any sex offense in Virginia that I can think of is a felony. And of course, you can get in the other 2 jurisdictions, Maryland and the District of Columbia, there's variations of that. Within the state and the district themselves, different courts have their own, I shouldn't say idiosyncrasies, but their own customs. And of course, we must know and we must comply.
Gallery to Tenleytown, Metro Center detail 1930 to 2100 hours. Gonshire.
589.
Friendship Heights to Shady Grove, Young.
756.
Pentagon to Huntington, Roach.
760.
Bearing in mind the notorious dangers of Washington, the Metro maintains a sense of proportion where personal safety is concerned. Emergency handles in the cars are marked, use only in life-threatening situations. Most underground crime is far from life-threatening. There are pickpockets, of course, and a new breed of beggar who holds up a half-used ticket and demands enough money to upgrade it. The worst and most frequent offenses take place in the above-ground parking lots.
Attempted auto theft, Capitol Heights. There were 2 of them yesterday. They had a whole stash of tools on them. They had screwdrivers. They had a piece of pipe about this long that had a little point on it. It looked like the top of a fence almost, but it was heavier than that. I don't know what it was for. About this long, about this big around.
Well, we enforce all of the laws of the signatories that make up Metro. The law, for instance, says no smoking. We enforce that. No eating. We enforce that. No drinking. We enforce that. We don't have our own rules. These are the rules of the states and the District of Columbia that we are made up from.
Okay, that's it. Anybody have any questions? Any comments or ideas? Okay, let's be careful out there, guys. Is that better? Okay.
Even if some congressmen and senators take the Metro to Capitol Hill, and it has been known, they hate to leave the seat of power while the power is actually switched on. The Capitol Hill Club is the closest place to the Capitol itself where a lobbyist can ask them to lunch or dinner. The bells that summon the lawmakers to the chamber to vote also sound here, so they can hurry back.
Hi, Bill.
Trace, how you doing? Good to see you.
Thank you for joining me today.
Glad to.
The socializing aspect is an important aspect on Capitol Hill. For instance, at the Capitol Hill Club, lobbyists do not go there to have lunch together. They go there to have lunch with either staff or members of Congress. And obviously, lobbyists like to be seen with members of Congress. It helps our reputation, and it kind of changes the attitude of our peers, perhaps, if they see us out with members of Congress having lunch. I don't know who invented power breakfast, but I would like to have a word with them. It was bad enough that we have fundraisers that go to 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night, but when you don't get home till 10 o'clock and you have to turn around and go to a power breakfast at 7, it gets a bit tedious. Everything is politics in this town, and everything is power.
In Washington and Metroland, everyone tries to stake out some professional territory. Apart from politicians and their followers, lawyers form the largest single group, 27% of all working residents by one count. Chip Stanback Jr. is president of the Virginia Bar Association.
We like to say it's the capital of the world. You can't do any business unless you come to Washington. And of course, whenever you're doing business, particularly international business, you have lawyers that, and more importantly, you have lawyers that are in Congress. They make our laws, good or bad, but you do have a lot of lawyers here. You have them sitting right on Capitol Hill. Lawyers are, how shall I say, image conscious. So there's a lot of imagery that goes on between lawyers in terms of trying to be better than the next lawyer, or one-upmanship, if you will. Washington is a fun place, always has been. I was born and reared here, and there's so many things to do, so many people to meet and have fun with, that really is conducive to being a party animal.
It's not all work, even for lawyers. When the Washington Redskins play football, everybody plays. Power dressing takes on new meaning.
I think that the Washington metropolitan area is an area in which you have that opportunity to have people mix well. I would attribute the limited success that I have to being able to get along well with people and understanding their needs and trying to accommodate them, as well as trying to get my job done.
I think Dexter's going to be ready.
He better be. He better be. Have a new snapper, so we shouldn't have any problems not snapping the ball properly.
And with a little luck, we won't even have to punt.
How about that? Touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. Super Bowl.
Washington attracts a unique temporary resident. Men and women come from all over the country to spend a few years, studying at one of the numerous universities, working in the office of a congressman from their home state. These young high flyers give the capital city a particularly high energy level. Even before Metro, some people could get around Washington underground, some parts of Washington. A private subway conveys congressmen and senators between their office buildings and the legislative chambers of the Capitol. Metro men scorn it as no more than a sideways elevator.
Well, ever since I have been in the Senate for 34 years, we've had the subway to the Capitol. The first building here is what's now called the Russell Building. That's the building we're in now. And that's the only Senate office building that was used when I came here.
Senator Strom Thurmond was one of the earliest advocates of Metro. When he first trod the corridors of power, the official city could be encompassed by a cab ride costing a few cents and taking but a few minutes.
We now have 3 Senate office buildings, and the subway was extended there. I don't think any senators in any of these buildings would stand for not having a subway. It takes them quickly and saves time, and in my opinion, it's been very helpful to have that subway to do that.
The textile bill is coming up at 4:30.
Yeah, that train was lost women go to women's hair, you know. And so I think put glass around to protect the women's hair.
Well, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
What is your interest in the textile bill?
Well, about 48% of the jobs, sometimes the bell rings for a vote. I'll tell a constituent or a staff member just come and walk with me to, if we have time to walk. If we don't have time to walk, we have to take the subway, and they can talk to me on the way. And by having the subway available, we can stay here 3 or 4 minutes longer than otherwise. Difficult to do it when the government subsidizes some of these companies that send textiles in here. Then they pay such low wages, maybe $50, about $3 an hour. Okay.
Are you going to support the bill?
Oh yes, I'm supporting it. I'm strong for the bill.
Pass today?
The matter of transportation is very important to people because they have to go to work, and if they can ride the metro, they don't have to fool an automobile and get into traffic and maybe take an hour when they could do it in 15 minutes on the metro, and then have to find a parking place and pay for parking after they get there. So the metro is a godsend to people who have an opportunity to use it. If you go here to the Capitol, anywhere around this Capitol here, just automobiles, automobiles. I think we need to extend the lines, though, further out to prevent a congestion of traffic, a waste of time, slow traffic, takes gasoline, uses people's time, and with Metro you can go in a hurry.
Washington is a southern city. It lies below the Mason-Dixon line that, before the Civil War, divided the slave-owning southern states from the free north. Some 75% of District of Columbia residents are black. Many are fairly recent arrivals from the deep south. In the larger metroland, the proportion is about 35%. The blacks of the inner suburbs campaigned for Metro in preference to unsightly freeways that would have let people from beyond the urban sprawl come in by car. Their slogan was, "No white roads through black bedrooms."
Where do I go?
there are quite a few black persons that reside in the Washington metropolitan area. Black people do not have the power that they have within the city.
Still going today? Sure. You know it. All right. Super low. Hey. All right. You know it. You know it. Got junior hall here. Junior rep. But I love the Mets, though. I love the Mets. Love the Mets.
I use the subway system going to the Redskins games because you can go and have a good time and not have to worry about driving your vehicle because the subway brings you and takes you back. It's easy to get in and get out, particularly since I started the game preparation by having some champagne with some friends and then going to the game and having some beer and some other spirits. So it was very facilitated having a good time to be able to catch the subway in and catch the subway out. The Metro does not cover as many areas as it should at this time. However, they have broken ground for expanding the subway stations.
All right.
Once committed to Metro, the planners did nothing by half. To reach the platform in Bethesda, Maryland, the longest escalator in the world had to be built, 213 feet 10 inches against 196 feet for the previous record holder in Leningrad. The Woodley Park Zoo station had to be carved out of solid rock, 205 feet down. That one subway stop cost $50 million. The escalation of Metro's cost from the mere $2.5 billion first allocated for it is not a new story in Washington. Back in 1791, Pierre L'Enfant, the city's first planner, told Congress the design he had been asked for would cost $3,000. The bill he finally sent in was for $95,000.
When we started digging right downtown in the center of Washington, underground, there are such a tangle of telephone wires, of nerves and little veins and arteries that you wouldn't believe. So very carefully, they had to dig down almost like a surgeon going through somebody's brain and be sure that they didn't cut these telephone wires. There are probably more long-distance lines in the downtown section right there than there are any other place in the United States, including the hotline to you-know-where.
This slick and speedy system has turned hundreds of thousands of residents into what the planners call transit dependents. And it's turned places like Silver Springs, Maryland, from outposts into satellite cities.
One thing improved transit does is to force the people and the official planning agencies to decide really what the future is. 20 years ago, if you looked around this station here, no high-rise, the little low buildings. Silver Spring, being part of Montgomery County, being right smack on the border of the District of Columbia, perhaps knew that someday it would grow, but they didn't really realize the power that improved transportation will bring. Early on, we went to the planning agencies and the political governments of the region and said, there's going to be a rapid rail system. You'd better get thinking of where you want to put it and what effect it will have on you. Don't say we didn't tell you. Those political agencies and planning agencies, some of them did a good job of looking ahead, many of them did not. And as a result, today, they're Johnny-come-latelys.
San Francisco is like no other city in the United States, and the people who live here never let anyone forget it. It got onto the map of America early. Sir Francis Drake was one of the first European visitors to this part of Northern California in the 17th century. Wide stretches of the Pacific Ocean surround the city, spanned by no less than 5 bridges, among them the Golden Gate, still America's most popular tourist attraction. Bay Bridge is the busiest, though. Between the two of them, they carry over 100,000 cars every day, and many more people. Some 67% of commuters travel in carpools, most of them heading into the city. With ownership at over 2 vehicles per family, California is the automobile state. The city of San Francisco is the focal point for a far larger community known as the Bay Area. This was the catchment area for the district's new subway when it opened in 1972, the Bay Area Rapid Transit, or BART. Its objective? To relieve road pressure and provide easy access between the centers. It was to be an undertaking of ambition and complexity, the like of which would never be repeated. The system's 3 lines come together in the heart of Oakland. BART was a concept ahead of its time, intended from the first to be the most technologically advanced this side of the 21st century. Stations and trains were designed to maximize passenger comfort and safety, and all services were to be fully automated, even to the extent that the trains would not have drivers. But from the outset, there were problems. Computers needed debugging, industrial disputes held up construction, and even today, intelligent ticket gates do not provide for the eventuality that if you do not have the right change, it is impossible to exit. But these were minor setbacks when compared to the political complications. Manager Keith Bernard was the man who had to deal with many of them.
We had a long 4 or 5 year period where we were fighting a battle just to keep the system working and get control of the system, of the maintenance of the system, to get the system working reasonably well. That left for 5 or 6 years later the job of correcting the major deficiencies. And if there's one lesson, it's that when you build a system like this, especially where you're pushing the state of the art technologically, you have to have good systems overview, a systems approach to it, which understands that if you change something in one part of the system, that'll have an effect on another part. In the days that BART was built, that discipline was much less understood than it is today.
Concord train now approaching Powell Street. The next Concord train is approaching Powell Street. The next direct train to Fremont is approaching 16th Street. Fremont train is approaching 16th Street.
Jeff, our computer down here reading 00, and that's why we have an alarm. Thanks.
BART's control room makes the flight deck of the Starship Enterprise look like child's play. 2 central mainframe computers, one for backup, are supported by 52 others throughout the network. It took the company nearly a decade before automatic train control was operating at full capacity, but it now maintains nearly 95% punctuality in peak hour schedules. Rush hour trains depart downtown San Francisco and Oakland every 4 minutes. The system monitors every arrival and departure, coordinates all signaling and spacing, and even decides the speed of the trains, which reach up to 80 miles per hour in the Trans-Bay Tunnel. The cars were well planned for the people they serve. Air conditioning, carpeting, tinted windows for the overground stretches of the line, They were designed so that every passenger could sit, but such was the demand that handrails were soon added. Despite competition from 18 other local transit agencies, both private and public, some 200,000 people a week now travel by BART. The company reckons it saves them over 50% of the cost of commuting by car. The Transit Authority's vision of a pioneer underground railway to match past glories only now seems to be paying off. It took several years before the traveling public could be persuaded to share it or vote for it.
Well, I think BART was sold as a very high-image system, and it had to be. This area was growing out of an understanding of transit. They had abandoned a street railway system, which was an excellent network serving the East Bay and San Francisco. And the automobile was on the rise, and the Bay Area was beginning to choke in congestion and automobile traffic. So to do something dramatic, especially when it needed a vote of the people, I think they felt they had to pose a very substantial new product. It was also the space age, the beginning of the we can do anything feeling, Silicon Valley, high tech. That was beginning to grow here in the Bay Area at the time. And I think that was the right approach. If they hadn't done that, I don't think the vote would have passed.
One thing the passengers were insistent about was that there should be a driver at the controls, if only to tell them where to get off. Since a serious fire in 1979, onboard operators are now trained to handle any emergency, and BART has put its early problems to rest. To date, they've laid 385 miles of track, and more are planned. There was an earlier transit system for which San Francisco was well known. Cable cars have been running in the city since the turn of the century, celebrated in song and story. But despite their mechanical reliability, the system has been largely abandoned by recent administrations, but at least not by the tourists. They were the ideal solution for negotiating the feature that distinguishes San Francisco from every other American city, its hills. There are 40 of them, perhaps the most famous being Crookedest Street. Here, the higher you live, the higher your social standing. Nob Hill would never have been Nob Hollow. House prices in San Francisco are among the highest in the country. But what houses they are. Somerset Maugham called this the most civilized city in America. Every street seems to tell the story of its checkered past. It was the Californian gold rush that first attracted immigrants to the city. The Chinese arrived in the largest numbers, And today this is the biggest Chinatown in the country and occupies a large slice of the downtown area. Ever since it was a small fishing village, waves of migrants have broken on San Francisco's welcoming shores. In the liberated 60s and 70s, it became the gay center of the country. Castro Street was transformed into the community's main street. Never a place to worry about where the limits to liberalism might be drawn, San Francisco even elected a gay mayor. His memory is far from forgotten as others benefit from the city's progressive stance. Many claim this was where it all started, the birthplace of the alternative lifestyle, of student radicalism, and the summer of love. Haight-Ashbury today appears to have changed little, and San Franciscans still champion the cause of enlightened social change. Peace, love, and understanding may still be the message, but it's now being preached to a much wider audience, and in a different context. If the flower children of yesterday have been absorbed into home or corporation, their ideas are still precious to many, among them novelist Sarah McFadden.
The children of the 60s and that wonderful era in San Francisco are now integrated into all of San Francisco life. I have friends who are still sort of the last of the hippies and have not really given up the values of that period that they still regard as important. I have friends who've left them completely behind and moved into the straighter workaday world. But everybody who lived in San Francisco in that period remembers it with a great deal of affection and nostalgia. There were valuable and wonderful things that came out of it, and the children of the 60s cling to them still.
Sarah McFadden wrote a best-selling novel about the 60s and the explosion of radical liberalism. Much of California's elusive literary community joined her in advocating social and sexual change. Their legacy is felt today, though in less likely circumstances, in the workplace and office.
What remains of that emphasis on alternative lifestyles is present in the corporate world most strongly now in terms of training programs, for one, to sensitize managers, for example, to employees' needs. There are a number of corporations in San Francisco which pride themselves on their very progressive managerial styles, where employees have much more to say, for example, about the running of the company, where the hierarchies have broken down between managers and employees, and everybody is, ideally at least, made to think and feel that the company belongs to everybody, that it's a much more democratic way of doing things. And that, I think, is highly positive.
Do you need some help with that?
Yeah.
What is it?
I have 320 on it, and I came from Berkeley.
Okay, there's less than 320. It's been printed over there. I can't read what it is either. Does it say underpaid in the gate?
Yesterday.
Does it say underpaid in the gate? Go to ad fare.
Bart was not sidetracked by this shift of ideas from the social to the corporate.
Do you have any other ticket?
Quite early in the development of the system, the company sought out experts to advise in the handling of both staff and passengers. Station agent Barbara Doyle was trained in, among other things, transactional analysis.
Over the last few years, I think most all the agents have been through it now. It's a 2-day seminar. And they've sat back and they listened to all our complaints and about having to deal with crazy people and with drunks and with violent people and people on drugs. And the main thing that I got out of the 2 days is those percentages of patrons we deal with is probably 1%. And along with other agents, I was letting 1% of the patrons that I deal with spoil my day, you know, or give me a hard time, when 99% of the people are great. They're just people like anybody else. And you can't key into the one person that jumps the gate in front of you or starts cursing at you or, you know, some kind of bizarre behavior, and you go, oh, I can't deal with this. You know, well, if you can't, you don't belong here. Excuse me. Is this child with you? How old is the child? She needs to have a ticket.
Youth pass, is that?
No, the youth pass is only good on the Muni. She's entitled to a discount ticket on BART.
Barbara's station, Montgomery, lies deep beneath the heart of San Francisco's business district and one of its busiest streets, Market Street. This was the site of one of the great subterranean feats of the city's engineering history. Its lowest level is 200 feet down, 5 stories below street level. Where these well-shod feet step out, in 1967 was a water table formed by San Francisco Bay, a marine archaeologist's treasure trove, but a construction nightmare. After 4 years of tunneling, it was here that the final hole-through of the first BART line took place. In those days, there were more partners involved in the development of a subway for the Bay Area, some 5 districts, among them Marin County, who originally planned to suspend a platform for the subway tracks under the Golden Gate Bridge. The expense was too great, even for some of the city's wealthiest residents who live there. Their greatest hardship is the daily fog that rolls in off the Pacific to blur an impressive fair-weather panorama. The center of Marin County is Sausalito, once a Portuguese fishing village, now home to many of the better-heeled, though water-bound habitués of the county. Among them Melvin Belli, celebrity lawyer, multiple divorcee, and temporary yacht dweller. Now in his early 80s, Belli has dominated the West Coast legal scene for more than half a century. Dogs, house hunting, and Rolls Royces are among his other pastimes.
Come on. Come on.
Come on. Come on.
I have to get a house someplace in San Francisco because I can't do the entertaining I'd like to do, and I can't really live like I'd like to do on the yacht. And then I like a garden. The dogs can get out and run on the beach, but that's not compensation enough for living on the boat and the inconvenience. And it's inconvenient coming back and forth from Marin County, and then it is in San Francisco. That's why I'd rather be in San Francisco than on the houseboat. It's a yacht, it's not a houseboat. It's 110 feet. It's a big one.
Wherever Belli lived, he'd be unlikely to travel by subway. But then there'll always be those for whom underground travel will remain an elusive pleasure.
I may not be the best lawyer in the world, although I'll dispute it if someone says I'm not, but I've had more fun than any lawyer in the world, now or back to Abraham Lincoln's time. I've enjoyed every minute of it, 53 years of it, and I hope that he's going to give me another 53 years. I was in law school and graduated in 1933. I was just a little bit ahead of the avant liberal movement in Berkeley, the bearded ones and the shoeless ones. So I never had an opportunity to embrace them except as clients.
Berkeley, which can be reached by BART, is one of the most prestigious university campuses in the United States and scene of the most violent anti-Vietnam protests in the late 60s. Today, the only recruiters are the banks and credit companies, persuading students to invest their allowances. Or Silicon Valley headhunters, anxious for tomorrow's high achievers to join their ranks. Gone are yesterday's dreamers. This is the real world. This is where many graduates aim for, San Francisco's business district. Northern California is the technological heartland of the United States. Silicon Valley, its center, less than an hour away. Easy access to capital and breakthroughs in microchip technology have persuaded many companies to move into the area, revitalizing financial activity and stimulating growth. Among those who have prospered is Tony Parkhill. Vice president of a local computer software company, He believes the area is particularly suitable for the smaller businesses that are prepared to invest here.
Typically we see, and this is the charm of the Bay Area and leads to its entrepreneurial spirit, we find that the highest technology is coming from the smallest companies that aren't necessarily bridled by their internal bureaucracy to just support the organization. So we think that there are quite a few advancements coming from small companies, and there's also certainly a capital base in the San Francisco Bay Area to invest in those companies and nurture them and give them the business acumen that's necessary to make them grow and survive in an otherwise fairly hostile business environment.
Hostile would not be the right description for where Tony and his family live. Orinda is one of the new satellite communities that nestle on the far side of the Berkeley Hills. 10 years ago, the only inhabitants here were a few farmers. The transformation has occurred due to one vital factor.
I think Orinda is an interesting town. It's very close to San Francisco. If we didn't have traffic, which BART takes care of for us, then it's only a 20-minute trip. So we have the advantages of being in San Francisco. However, Orinda is a very rural type of area. Before BART and freeways and other kinds of rapid transit, Orinda was a sleepy little hollow on the other side of the Berkeley Hills, and really wasn't a place to live because the commute into San Francisco to do your business was so long and tedious. However, BART today, for instance, has given us a very close connection. There are quite a few regular BART riders, but as a general rule, the people on the trains are very congenial. They do things that are similar to what I do. They work in the city and live in similar surroundings, so we think it's been an excellent solution to the people moving problems, and it fits very well with the Bay Area's natural topography.
BART has substantially changed the physical geography of its catchment area, sometimes following existing corridors of transport, sometimes establishing them. Like the trailblazing pioneers, it has opened up the hinterland for new settlers, and there seems to be no stopping it. New partnerships are being struck up to develop land above and around the lines, and by the 1990s, the system will be extended by 35 miles, adding 10 new stations. Eventually, it's planned to encircle the bay. So many communities have been involved for so long now that the real costs of it are difficult to estimate. One thing is certain, it is what it set out to be, a public works project without equal in modern America.
BART was sold on the concept that the land use here is linear, follows narrow corridors, serves major city centers, some of which have been revitalized, all in accordance with BART. And today that is more important than it was then. The truth is that the region has expanded, is going to continue to grow, continues to focus on these corridors, some of which BART doesn't serve, and the traffic is worse than ever anyone would have imagined. So the solution that was imaginatively voted into place in 1962 is still the right solution.